Fincantieri will build the new landing ships for the United States. So in the past few weeks, the news that many were expecting arrived, namely the selection of the Fincantieri shipyard. Marinette Marine as one of the two chosen to build the future landing ships. Medium-sized ships for the Marines are in the spotlight these days with the ship Tripoli, which, according to some, could play a key role in a landing on the island of Karg, which is not Klingon territory, but Iranian. And we'll try to dedicate an episode to it because it's a very important island. Today, instead, let's take a look at the contract planned for Fincantieri, which is not the only company involved. But let's take a step back, because this agreement is a sort of compensation that forces us to talk to you for a second, once again about the Constellation frigates. Being a sort of compensation, as mentioned, resulting from the failure of this program. To begin with, let's clarify the situation of our international shipbuilding industry a bit. The Fincantieri Marinette Group has 4 shipyards in the United States, 3 of which are in Wisconsin and 1 in Florida. Of these shipyards, the most important for military construction is Fincantieri Marinette Marine in Wisconsin, which is already operating at full capacity. And in fact, that's where the littoral combat ships of the Freedom class have been built for over 20 years. A shipyard that is central for the construction of frigates. Constellation class. The Constellation program, which started a few years ago, was supposed to provide the United States fleet with a new class of frigates based on the FREM. The Italian-French frigates, which were supposed to start from a solid foundation, but then for internal reasons underwent a series of changes that ultimately caused the entire program to collapse under the weight of costs, raising the question of why the United States relies on projects from other countries. Well, this would be material for a dedicated episode. Let me know in the comments if you want us to dedicate an episode to it. L'unità capoclasse per Frigate guided missile 62 Constellation began construction in 2022, but as mentioned, the continuous modifications requested compared to the original Italian version led to increased costs and especially longer delivery times, which first caused delays and then the total cancellation of the project. So it will come to a definitive halt with only 2 units already under construction right at the Italian-American shipyard. At that point, it became clear that in some way, the shipyard had to be compensated for the lost work, since Fincantieri had invested a lot to upgrade the Wisconsin shipyard specifically for the production of the Constellation frigates. And so we come to the present day, to the landing ships, with an announcement made last December 5th by the Secretary of the Navy, John Pellon. The Marine Corps has chosen the landing ship Tank 100 design from the shipyard. Attention, Dutch, Damen shipyards. Once again, a foreign design for the record for the new Land Ship Medium program, that is, Land Ship Medium. The new medium landing ships are intended to fill the gap between the large multi-role amphibious ships and the smaller vessels. In areas of intervention, in crisis zones, typically, just to give a random example, the Pacific Islands, these ships will have to provide the Marine Corps, especially the Marine Littoral Regiment, not only with the transport of personnel and vehicles, but also with the task of supporting expeditionary forces, including all aspects of resupply, equipment, and logistics. Thanks to their small size, they will also be able to operate in coastal areas or in small, less equipped ports. Of course, the original idea of the American fleet was to adopt completely new designs, but this idea was abandoned at the end of 2024 again for cost reasons. In fact, the United States Navy planned to acquire a fleet of 18 ships and had initially established
un costo unitario di circa
$150 million. But the project that was coming out had already reached an estimate well over $300 million and was quickly aiming to surpass even $400 million. As a result of these uncontrolled increases, a year later, an already existing and proven design was chosen, namely the landing ship Tank 100 project by Daman, as a starting point to create a new range of landing ships. Without starting from scratch, we can shorten turnaround, development, and production times. Similarly to what was done with the frames, we hope in this case that the Constellation disaster will serve as a warning, broadening the scope a bit. The same Daman project was also chosen by the Australian fleet for the construction of 8 units that will be built at the Australian Austral shipyard. For your information, a single ship of this type was also built for the Nigerian Navy, so let's take a quick look at these ships. Before we continue though, let me take a second to remind you that this episode was written by Marco Crespiatico, a journalist whose analyses are available here on the channel. Thanks to your support. Please leave a like, share the video, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy what we do, consider subscribing. Thank you very much. Alright, let's take a look at the landing ship, Tank 100 by Damanave, which is just over 100 meters long and weighs about 4,000 tons with a range of over 6,000 kilometers. At a maximum speed of 14 knots, which becomes almost 14,000 according to the manufacturer if you reduce the cruising speed to 10 knots, the ship can carry 500 tons of cargo in roll-on, roll-off mode, so it can be loaded and unloaded from both the front and the back. It has an internal space of 1,020 square meters, and there is also a flight deck for helicopters. Thanks to its modular design, if necessary, the landing ship Tank 100 can be converted during construction without major work into a landing ship Tank 120 by adding an extra 20-meter-long module. After the project was chosen, the selection of the shipyards for construction took place, and there are two of them. That is, the Bollinger Shipyards in Mississippi, which were actually partners with Damen Shipyards from the beginning in the proposal for the United States Navy, and Fincantieri Marinette Marine in Wisconsin. The first order will be for 8 units. The first 4 have already been ordered from the Bollinger Shipyards in September 2025 so that design and adaptation activities can begin. The other 4 units out of the 8 are directly related to Fincantieri Marinette, with the possibility of additional hulls in the future. However, be careful, because the final idea of the United States Navy is to eventually build between 18 and 35 units in total. If the timeline and costs stay as planned, judging by previous programs, it's only natural to have some legitimate doubts about the final numbers, legitimate doubts. Here, Marco, this gives us an indication. If you think that dividing production among several shipyards seems reasonable but could also lead to a bit of chaos, well, in the end, they must have thought about it, even the United States Navy. In fact, on February 17th, a competitive request for proposal was issued for a vessel construction manager for this new class of landing ships. Marco explains to us, in simple terms, what it is. They will have to choose which of the 2 shipyards will act as the main contractor and lead the project. Since there are several shipyards involved, the fleet would like a single company to take responsibility for the contract. Maybe to avoid any future blame shifting between the companies involved in case there are delays, but also to remove this responsibility from the institutional side, given the increasingly frequent delays in the management of military programs. And in this way, they're also trying to give the industries involved in this project a free hand. Project manager whose name we still don't know. They will not only be responsible for managing the construction sites but also for selecting and assigning subcontracts, negotiating and purchasing the equipment to be used, all the way to training the crew and handing over the final delivery to the government. All this, combined with the fact that the project is already tested, should in theory reduce risks and in fact costs and delivery times. Of course, Dam and Naval will still have to work together with the 2 shipyards for integration and configuration at every stage of production. It should be said that this approach is also designed to improve in the medium and long term the industrial capacity of the United States shipyards, which are not in their prime right now. To put it mildly, in conclusion, the next steps will require that by this April, the companies involved are ready to present their proposals. And by this summer, the United States Navy will finally have to choose the shipyard. Capo Commessa. The United States Navy expects that each ship could or should require between 32 and 36 months for construction, with final delivery within 6 years from the date of selection of the main contractor, so around 2032 roughly, of course. I hope we'll be here to share updates with you. I thank Marco, whom I officially welcome to the editorial team, and I remind you to follow his work and his podcast. You can find today's sources, and above all, also how to follow his work in the first highlighted comment on the YouTube channel. See you soon here on Gens Italia with more news.